Hi everybody, this is a video from Miss Duckworth's classroom. This is a lesson on how to answer the full novel question on your Poetry and Prose Paper 1 for CIE 0475. Okay, so this is obviously from the prose section of your literature paper 1. You've got roughly 45 minutes for this section of the exam. The most important thing here really is to make sure that you use your time wisely. So make sure you read through the question, you take enough time to plan your answers, and then you give yourself roughly around 30 minutes to write up your answer and a couple of minutes at the end just to check through and make any amendments if necessary. It's going to be so much easier for you if you continue to practice this method before you actually sit the exam. So as many times as you can look at practice exam papers and complete those questions, it'll be much more beneficial for you. So today I'm going to talk you through how to approach and answer the full novel question. Okay, so my previous lessons looked through how to answer the extract question, and this is slightly different than the extract question, so your approach is also going to be different. Now, don't panic in terms of how you answer this question, particularly as it is a closed book, so you obviously can't use direct quotations unless you memorize them. So I'm just going to go through the assessment objectives, just so you're very, very clear on how you gain marks for this paper and what is expected from your answer. So to start with, your AO1 and your AO2, I'm just going to combine those together. So you need to show that you need to show evidence that you've got a good understanding of the novel, the key characters, the relationships, the key events, in terms of the authorial choices and style, themes, motifs, symbols, setting. And because this is the full novel question, you can also think about chronology, so how events are organised and structured, how characters develop, how relationships develop, the way in which events are presented and why and at what point they occur in the novel. You also want to make sure that you show a good understanding of the deeper meanings of events or characters or symbols. Make sure that you are inferring and interpreting meaning, and you should be commenting on Knowles's intention wherever you can. What is it that he wants to show you? Why does he want to show you this? Why at this particular point? Why through this character, etc. And use of relevant contextual information. As I've said in my previous videos, please don't just bolt on contextual information. If it helps to support your interpretation, if it helps for you to talk about author intention through using context, then by all means do it. Don't just bolt it on at the end of a paragraph because you've forgotten to do it so far. AO3, so good understanding of how events, characters, relationships, themes, etc. are presented to you. So this mainly is focused on language, structure and form. Language, remember, is word choice, so any words that are chosen for a particular effect. Now it may be that you don't remember any quotations, so it's very, very difficult for you then to comment on language, but you should be able to at some point comment on a word even that you have remembered. So even if you remember, for example, if we're talking about leper and you remember that he was wearing a white hat, even just you remembered the word white, you can comment on the connotations of that word. So do try and remember some words and phrases. You're not expected to remember the entire novel, you're not expected to remember long quotations, but even if you're trying to paraphrase or find different words, you should be able to comment on some aspect of language. In terms of the structure, how events are presented, how they develop, how characters develop, at what point in the novel a particular event occurs and why. And the form, remember it is a novel, we do have Jean as a narrator. That also counts as form, how events are relayed to you via Jean and what the implications of this are. And you must also show that you know why they're presented in this way. So if Jean is presented in a particular way, why do you think Knowles chooses to do that? Why do you think that Knowles chooses to have Jean jounce the limb? What does that show about Jean and Finney and their relationship? How does that link to the wider context of the war or adolescence? So always think about why these choices are made. And finally, AO4, which is to do with how you then present your ideas in the essay format. So you should be presenting your ideas in a coherent and relevant way, and you should be developing your own personal response to the question. So how are you interpreting the question, and which points do you need in order to back up your ideas? So not every essay is going to be the same. If you have an essay on Jean, not everybody is going to use the same examples about Jean, and that is absolutely fine, because this is where you show your own personal response to the novel, the characters, the setting, the events. So this is a question that we're going to look at today, and remember that in the exam you will be given an extract with a question to go with the extract, and then you'll be given a second option, which is something like this. And this question is based on the full novel. Please make sure that you understand the difference, and please make sure that when selecting your question, you're very, very clear on which one you have selected. It does happen that people select the full novel question, but then they use the extract only as their evidence. You won't have enough evidence if you do that, because you should be thinking about the entire novel, not just that very, very short section. So with this question, you are trying to go back through your memory, and you're trying to think about all the different events from start to finish, and you're trying to think about which events or which points in the novel are relevant to what you want to say. Remember that this is a closed book exam. You will not have a copy of the text, so it's a good idea to have read the text at least twice on top of what you've done in lesson, in order to kind of have a good understanding of the order of events, how the novel progresses, how characters develop and progress. But also, as you go, it would be a great idea if you just made little notes of words, phrases, interesting quotations that you try and kind of memorize, even if you just have them stuck up on your bedroom wall somewhere, so every day you just look at them. So this is our question. How does Knowles present the significance of leper? So first things first, let's look at the steps that you must go through. Steps actually help you organise your time in the exam. So it's a good idea to have these clear steps in your mind, so you know exactly how you're processing this question and how you're moving towards developing your answer. So step one is to read the question and deconstruct it. Deconstruct means to pull apart, take out the keywords, and know exactly what they're asking you to do. So think about the keywords, think about what they mean, and think about what your focus is. So here we have, how does Knowles present? Present is always to do with method. So in what ways is leper presented to you? How is he presented? Why is he presented in this way? And here we have our key word. So we want to talk about the significance or the importance of leper. So why is he important to the story as a whole? Why is he important to the other characters? What makes him stand out? And our focus here obviously is leper. So now we know what the question is asking us to do. So step two is where we brainstorm initial ideas. Now note I put the word initial here because what you want to do is you kind of want to throw everything that's in your brain onto the paper first of all. So get all of your ideas out, and then you can kind of go back, have a look at all of your ideas, cross out the ones that you think, no, that's not strong enough, or no, that's not relevant, and to just decide on which are your strongest points, and then they become your firm plan. So you choose your best ideas and you begin to paraphrase your evidence. Paraphrase is where you can't remember the exact quotation, but you can kind of remember the gist of it. Paraphrasing is fine, as long as you do have something paraphrased, because this now becomes your evidence and stands in place of a quotation. Step 4, write up your answer. Okay, so we've done step 1. Now we're going to look at how you would do step 2. So I'm just going to move through how I would approach this question, how I would approach brainstorming, and then creating my final plan. So my tips to you here are, try and brainstorm ideas in chronological order. So go to the beginning of the novel and just kind of work through in your mind and think about all the times that leper appears. Think about the significant times that he appears. What's he doing? What does it represent? So you're tracking how the focus of the question, in this case leper, changes and develops throughout the novel. Start by thinking about how you would describe leper. So think about maybe descriptive words that would use this character, and then ask yourself, well, how do I know that? How do you know? That's the method, okay? And it links back to the question, how does Knowles present leper? So if you're able to say, well, I know this because he wears a white hat, or I know this because he enjoys being around nature, then we're talking about methods and we're identifying anything that can link back to this idea of present. Okay, so these are my initial ideas. So I just brainstormed anything I could think about in terms of my initial ideas. I didn't go beyond this because these are quite big ideas. So I didn't need to track every tiny little thing about leper. I just went for the big ones because I know if I don't pick something big, then I'm not going to have enough to say about it. Now, my ideas actually did go in chronological order. They may not always for you, and that's fine. Get your ideas down on a piece of paper, and then you can just go and start to number them in terms of chronology. So what I know about Leper is he is quite a timid and scared character. I believe, this is my personal opinion, I believe that he does represent peace and innocence, particularly in the ways that he is presented in the first part of the novel. I do think that we see a huge drastic change in Leper that manifests itself in multiple different ways. I think he's definitely a character who is not ready for the atrocities of war. And because he's not ready, I think he's therefore changed by war. So these are all of my initial ideas. So then I'm going to think to myself, well, how? How do I know it? And if you've got time, this is what you should be trying to do in your exam. And you don't have to do it even in as much detail as I have. You don't even need to write in partial sentences. Just words and phrases will do, because this is your plan, these are your notes, it's whatever helps you. So the how do I know? So I ask myself, well, I do think that he's timid and scared, but what is it from the novel that really makes me think that? And my initial thought is the fact that he won't jump from the tree and he won't engage in blitzball. So that will then become my evidence. But those are also the methods in which Nos presents this aspect of Leper's character. How do I know that he represents peace and innocence? He does enjoy nature. It's a huge part of his character. And I also have in my head this image of the white bobbing hat as he goes off to war. So again, that's quite a significant event. The drastic change in him, I think, for me, comes when he is the first to enlist, because Knowles has set him up as all of these things, it's completely unexpected. How I know he's not ready for the atrocities of war: he deserts the army, so he doesn't even stay. He suffers hallucinations. These are the hallucinations that he explains, that he describes to Jean. And he visibly is mentally broken by war, and it completely alters his character. Taking that further, how do I know he's been changed by war? He does see Jean for who he is, so he reveals that he knows Jean. He sees straight through the facade that Jean tries to put up, which previously he wouldn't have said the things that he says to Jean later on. And then he gives evidence in the trial at the end. He is no longer fearful or timid or scared. He's able to stand up in front of the other boys and denounce Jean for what he did to Finney. So these are my initial ideas, and what I then want to do is I want to then have a concrete plan that I'm going to use for the exam. So what I want to try and do is make this a little bit smaller, because there's no way I'll be able to talk about all of this in 30 minutes. So I've got about 5 ideas. You may have 5, you may have 6, you may not even have that, you may have 3. It's completely dependent on the question and how you're approaching the question, how you feel about it. So once you decide on your final choices, you do need to make brief notes on what you will say and how your ideas show his significance. I would spend 6 minutes making notes. Then you've got maybe 5 to 10 minutes to try and link it to concrete examples. And by concrete examples, I mean what happens in the novel to show that. What does he do? What does he say? What do others say? Those are your concrete examples. And I will talk to you later on about how to paraphrase, because with this question, because you don't have the novel in front of you, it's so easy to then just start to tell the story, which if you do that, then you're not allowing yourself to be interpretive or analytical. As you choose the examples, you should also be thinking about what you're going to say about them and how they link to the initial point that you've made. So one of my initial points from the previous slide was he's timid and scared. I have to keep going back to that, otherwise I will start to tell the story. So going back to your point helps to kind of rein yourself in so you don't go off on a tangent. And then also be thinking, and no matter what the question is, why? Why does Knowles want to present Leper, Jean, Finney, this relationship, the war, in the way that I'm describing? So why does he choose this particular technique or strategy, or why does he have Leper act in this particular way? So why does he do it? What does he want to show? Okay, so now we're on to step 3. So if you've just got a range of ideas kind of thrown down on your paper, you're going to want to start to number them in terms of chronological order. So decide on your best ones and then decide on which one is going to come first in your essay. It's much easier to start with the one that appears first in the novel as well. So I'm going to go through mine, and out of these I'm going to choose the strongest ones, the ones that I feel confident on, and the ones where I actually think that I can remember enough of the evidence to either paraphrase or even maybe remember a word or phrase myself. So this is the final plan that I've chosen. You can see I've gone from 5 points to 3. And as said on the previous slide, I've then gone through and made a few notes. So initially, he's seen as timid and scared, and I know this because of the tree. I'm then going to talk about method here. So the tree is a symbol of rebellion, bravery, friendship, and blitzball is a symbol of the war. So then I'm also talking about technique, and this is going to remind me when I start to write up my essay, oh yeah, I want to mention that it's a symbol, and then I want to analyse this symbol, because you still want to get your marks for analysis. Even if you're not choosing a quote that you can analyse, you can still analyse other techniques used by Knowles. My second point, the drastic change when he enlists. I'm going to talk about how he was the first to enlist, that's my evidence, but I'm also going to talk about the white hat. Now, I actually haven't looked back at the novel myself when I've been doing any of this lesson, so I can remember the white hat. I can't remember the exact phrase, but I can remember that, so I'm going to talk about how that is a symbol, and then I could even talk about the connotations of the word white. Number 3, I want to talk about how he's been changed by war, and I'm going to talk about the hallucinations, and if I have time, the relationship with Jean. And this is where, with your plan, it's absolutely fine if you don't get through it all. So this is why I've kind of made sure I've got enough up to this point, and if I don't get to this part, it's fine. I've still managed to talk about how he's been changed by war. I still have got a variety of different points and a variety of different evidence, but this is just kind of my backup. If I do have time to talk about Jean as well, then I will do. But my initial evidence is going to be the hallucinations that he has. He mostly has hallucinations of how the people that he's around transform into these very surreal images. And I'm going to link that to maybe how war transforms the boys, and maybe to show how that's actually quite symbolic of what could happen to them in the future, or what could happen to them mentally. And if I have time, I'm going to talk about the relationship that he has with Jean and how that is also altered by war. Particularly, you could pick an array of different evidence for this, but in my mind, what stands out to me is the animalistic language that is used by Jean to describe him when Jean goes to visit him, and they go out for a walk, and Jean actually becomes quite frightened by what Leper is saying. And the reason I chose that is because it's such a stark difference to the way that the beginning of the novel, Jean even says that it was very difficult for them not to make fun of him, because he's just such a weak character. And the fact that he's then described using animalistic language shows that maybe Jean is fearful for him, and it shows just how much he's changed. So all of these are just initial things that popped up in my head. Again, I have not gone back through the novel, so I'm trying to do this as realistic as I possibly can. And when you read my example, you'll see that actually I don't have direct quotations, I'm just paraphrasing. Okay, now just a note on how to paraphrase. So when you're paraphrasing, what you're trying to remember is that you've got to maintain the key ideas from the original quote. Now, obviously, you're not going to have the quotations, but you're going to have some element of it in your mind. You're going to have some overview of what was said in the novel, and you don't want to change the base meaning of that. If you can, try and include one key word from it. So you may not remember all of this, but you may remember that he says, "I don't want it," because that's quite simple. Or you just may remember the word shrank, or you may remember the word anguish. Or you may not remember any of it. You just may remember that he doesn't want the ball. Introduce your evidence just like you would a quote. So by introducing it, I mean you set the context of the quote. Who is speaking, or who is being spoken about? Who are they speaking to? When is it? Your description is your evidence, so treat it as such. So whenever you paraphrase or you describe what happens, that is your quotation, and just try and keep that in your head so that you don't then continue and start to tell the story. Once you've described what happens, stop. Then move on to your interpretation or your explanation or your analysis. Do not start to storytell. So this is an example of a quote. Leper looked up in anguish, shrank away from the ball, and voiced his first thought, a typical one: "I don't want it." So you should know that that is from when the boys are playing blitzball. Now, my paraphrased version is over here. And I'm introducing it just like I would a regular quotation. Leper is not as competitive as the other boys and doesn't want to engage in the warlike game of blitzball. So this is completely introduced. I'm telling you who it's about, what's happening. This is demonstrated when he's thrown the ball but refuses it. That's it. That's my evidence. He's thrown the ball but he refuses it. Notice that I don't have any language from the original because I couldn't remember, but that's absolutely fine because I've summed up the key ideas. It's the base meaning in that quotation. And then I start to work through, if you're used to Peel, this would be your explanation. This suggests that he's scared of it. That's my explanation. And then I would start to continue and maybe make interpretations. It also suggests that he's not ready for war, or this shows another aspect of his personality. So then you would build upon what you've already said. But the important thing is to stop right here. Otherwise, you will then start to tell the story. You don't want to say, and then the other boys continue to play, and then Finney says that everybody's an enemy, and then Gene's running with the ball and he doesn't know where to go. Like, it's very easy to start telling the story, but just try and treat your paraphrase statement as a quotation and stop yourself when you think you're done. What I do suggest is that you do a few examples of your own. So it would be a good idea to go through the novel, just go to the key events and just pick quotations out and then paraphrase them. Highlight one key word in the quotations that you pick and just try and see if that can stick in your brain. And that's also my top revision tip, is just go back through all of the key events and just try and write down a few words and phrases that you think you'll be able to remember, or go through the different characters and write down a few words and phrases from the novel to describe them. Like I said, have them around your room or have them on cards in front of you so you can just go through them whenever you have a spare 5 minutes. Okay, so if you've watched my other lessons, you'll know that I advocate the how, the what, how, why approach, just because it does keep you focused and it does make sure that you kind of move through all the different skills on the mark scheme. So the what do you learn, what stands out, what is shown, what is the significance of what you see. So for example, in the beginning of the novel, leper is, and I'll make a statement about that. And that's what's shown to me, or no presents leper as being. And then you move on to what your evidence is. So we've got what do you learn and what is your evidence that shows this. In this instance, your example is going to be your paraphrasing, unless you do remember a quotation or a word or a phrase. Then you move on to the how. How do you know this? So if he's timid and scared, how do you know? How is it shown to you? So, for example, if we use the quotation on the previous slide and you don't remember any of it, but you remember the word shrank, well, I know he's timid and scared because the word shrank is used. And then we move to the why. Why is it shown in this way? For this question, why is leper shown in this way? Why are his actions shown in this way? Why do other people treat him in this particular manner? And then you think about why. Why does Knowles want you to understand this? Why does he want you to see this? Why does he want you to feel this way? Etc. Okay, in terms of how to structure your essay, so you do want to give a brief introduction because you are going to focus on the entire novel, so you want to make it a little bit clearer for the examiner what elements you're going to talk about in terms of the focus of the question. So give a brief overview, focus on the key word. In this instance, what's the significance of leper? What does he represent? Why is he integral to the story? But also think about the points that you've now got from your final plan and just give a bit of an overview. So you're looking for maybe 3 paragraphs or sections. It's always difficult for me to say just do 3 paragraphs because it may be that your first paragraph about leper being timid and scared actually is very, very long, and then it actually moves into 2 paragraphs. And just do remember, for organisational purposes, if you've got a paragraph that is becoming too long, then just know when to cut it and to move on to a second paragraph, and just use linking phrases. In addition, furthermore, this also shows. So sometimes with my own classes, I don't call them paragraphs, I may call them sections. You may know them as peels. So paragraph, section, peels, it all means the same thing. It's just your answer to the question, the different points that you're going to mention. If you have time for paragraph 4, Yes, by all means, but if you only have time for 3, so if you do have 30 minutes, if you've moved through your plan effectively and you've given yourself a full 30 minutes, this would be roughly about 10 minutes per paragraph or per section. So you want to give yourself enough time to develop your analysis and your interpretation. And your conclusion, just maybe 1-2 lines. What have you shown about the focus in the question or LEPA? What does Knowles present and why? And how effectively does he do this? What's his message, perhaps? You should be trying to discuss language, if you can remember any keywords that are used, discuss the connotations. Structure, how LEPA develops and changes. Then you've got a range of different techniques that you can also comment on. Themes, symbols, contrasts between characters or actions, foreshadowing, juxtaposition, etc. So as you've gone through the novel in class with your teachers, you probably have an array of different techniques that you can draw upon to just remember those as you're moving through your answer. Okay, again, this is something that I've used with all of the other lessons as well, in terms of how to structure your paragraph or your section or your peel. So in terms of the structure, it's kind of a bit like a pyramid, and we start off with your point, which is probably just a sentence, the smallest part, and then you just move through and you develop and you add on, and you're trying to move as much as you can to the top band of that mark scheme. So you start off with your point, then you've got your evidence, so which example backs up your point. Just describe it or paraphrase it, or if you've got some quotations in your head, by all means use them. Multiple responses to your evidence, because you want to build. So initially, what does the evidence show? You can use some of these phrases to help you. And then you want to develop a second response. So you maybe layer your analysis or double up on techniques. So maybe you say, well, this is juxtaposition, but it's also a symbol. So you're doubling up on what you're talking about. You can develop your response by analysing language, but this is only going to work if you've actually remembered a word or a phrase from the novel. So for example, the illustration that I used earlier about Lepa's hat. So I remembered that it's white. That will do. Then I can talk about language, the connotations of the word white, what it suggests about him, why it's been used, for example. And when you're developing and layering your response, then you've got these words and phrases to kind of help you, but also to show the examiner that you are building. And then if you can develop your third response by talking about Knowles, or the effect on the reader, or the context. So this is why I said to you, probably you want to spend 10 minutes on each of your points, paragraphs, sections, peels, whatever you want to call them, because you want to try and do as much as you can. It's better for you to do 3 very detailed sections or paragraphs than it is to do 5 or 6 that are just a point and a very brief example, and then you just say, oh, this shows that he is scared, and then you move on. So really show the examiner what you can do in terms of your analysis and your interpretation. Okay, so let's look at an example. Now, this is not the full essay. This is just my introduction and then the first point on the final plan that we looked at a few slides ago. So what I have here is just a checklist, and it may help you to have a checklist of your own, either use something similar to this or just create something that helps you. It may be that you know that you're very, very good at having a relevant point. Maybe you know that you're good at including evidence, or maybe sometimes you do forget technique or you do forget language. So you have a checklist that's personal to you and what you need to remember. So don't include everything you think, well, and I always remember to do a relevant point. Just have your own checklist to help you. And there are some extras down here in terms of academic phrases. So these are just phrases that help to move your essay along. Connectives and linking phrases, they not only link ideas together, but they show that you are developing and you're taking your ideas further. Now, if you notice, there's lots of colours and highlighting, just so that you can see as we go through this where all of these different aspects of my checklist are. Okay, so we start off with small introduction. Throughout the novel, we see the character of Lepa undergo dramatic changes. So I've got the focus here. The focus is Lepa. And then we've got some example of what I'm going to talk about. So I want the examiner to know that I'm aware that Lepa changes massively throughout the novel, and actually all of the points of my final plan are all linked back to this. So now I'm just giving an overview of what I'm going to be proving. Knowles presents the significance, so notice the key word here, of leper by including him in many of the major events in the novel, as well as presenting not only his relationship with others, but also the relationship he has with himself and his surroundings. Now here is an overview of all of the points that I'm going to be talking about, because everything on my final plan was either to do with the relationship he has with his friends and the other boys, but also the relationship he has with his own mental state, and also the relationship he has with the overarching element of the war that he actually experiences firsthand. So leper is initially presented as timid and scared. Now note the word initially here, which lets the examiner know that I'm going right back to the beginning, so I can set up how he's presented, because also I've mentioned that I'm going to talk about the changes up here. So we have a relevant point, shows that I've got a good understanding of leper because I have these words here that describe him. He is not as robust and dominant as the other boys, and even Jean admits that it is difficult to not make fun of leper. Now I don't remember the exact quote, but I know that he does mention Jean when he's talking about leper, and he tells us all the different aspects of leper's character, that he says because he is this way, it's difficult for us not to make fun of him. So I'm counting this as evidence, and the examiner would count it as evidence because it's just paraphrased. Now notice how, as I continue to read, I haven't actually analysed this or gone into much detail, because this isn't actually evidence that supports my initial point. This is just something that helps me along my way to get to my clear evidence for the point. So two of the main events we see the boys engage in are jumping from the tree and blitzball. Again, this is my evidence because this is from the novel, it actually happens. As a member of the group, leper is present at these events, yet refuses to participate in both. So again, I don't remember the exact quotations, but I do know that he refuses to jump from the tree, or he avoids jumping from the tree, and when he's thrown the ball, he doesn't catch it, doesn't want to be involved. Knowles uses the act of jumping from the tree to represent the rebellion of the boys. So here is writer intention. So do try and use the writer's name, because whenever you do use their name, you are forcing yourself to then talk about writer intention, and you're showing the examiner that you can do so and you can understand the message or the motivation. So it represents the rebellion of the boys. Now it's also, this is interpretation, so I'm interpreting what I think it means, and then I explain why. It's an activity that only the older boys partake in as they prepare for war. In addition, so I'm linking my ideas here using my connectives to move on. The jump from the tree is what initially bonds Jean and Finney, so it also symbolises friendship. So here I'm talking about a technique because it's a symbol. Therefore, so this word here now shows that I'm going to add to my analysis and interpretation. As leper refuses to jump, it highlights the extent to which he is an outsider in the group. Furthermore, the fact that he refuses to jump also shows the reader early on that leper is fearful and scared. So here I am also not only interpreting but going back to my own point. This idea is further reinforced when the boys engage in a game of blitzball. This game is created by Finney and acquires its name from the German World War II tactic Blitzkrieg. So here we've got a little bit of context, and notice that it's relevant. It enhances my point, it enhances my explanation. It's not just bolted on just because. Now here I'm going to set the context of the quotation that I'm going to use. When tossed the ball during the game, leper freezes and shrank from the ball. Now this is the only word that I remembered, so because I remember it, I'm definitely going to put it in there. The use of the word shrank. So because I could remember one word, I can now do some comment on my language. The use of the word shrank shows the extent of leper's fear of the game and suggests that, like an animal, he shrinks away in order to protect himself from it. So here I can do some clear analysis. And don't worry if you only actually get to do this once in your essay because you don't remember much of the language, because you're still showing your analytical skills even if you only do it here. Knowles expertly makes a link to war here and shows that through leper's refusal of the ball, he will also later refuse the real war, thus foreshadowing his desertion later on. So here I'm talking about a technique, structural technique, I'm talking about foreshadowing. So if you look, I've actually got multiple techniques here, and only once do I really talk about language. Now I'm moving on to, this is still my first idea or my first paragraph, my first section, but I realised that actually it's going to get a little bit long. So I decided to split it into two paragraphs. because now I'm going to continue to talk about Blitzball. Both the tree and Blitzball also show how unprepared Leopard is for the war, as he refuses to be part of the jump which prepares the seniors for war, and also refuses to join his fellow students when they play a game dictated by the rules of war. It is through these two symbols of strength, bravery, war, conflict and rebellion, that we see how significant Leopard is to the events of the novel. So notice how again we've now gone back to the key word from the question. Through Leopard, Knowles shows us, so we've got right intention here, how not everyone is mentally or physically prepared for the rigours of war or even for adolescence. Now, even though these are very small, they are still context, because the jump that the seniors undertake, so it's not actually supposed to be for Finney and Jean's year group, it's preparing them, it's part of their training, it's preparing them for the fact that they're about to go off to war. That is context. The fact that the novel is not only about war, but it's also about adolescence, is also context, because this is linking to the reasons why Knowles wrote the novel and what his influences were. In addition, Leopard's significance comes from the fact that he is contrasted to the others, in particular Jean and Finney. So again, I'm going back to the key word from the question. It is through this juxtaposition, now I've mentioned here that he contrasts the others, and then I remembered that that's actually a technique, so I'm going to include it here in the next sentence. So he is juxtaposed with these characters in many ways. So it's through this juxtaposition that we see the extent of Leopard's timidity and unpreparedness for his future. He also represents the non-conformist element of the novel and shows a different aspect of adolescence. So if you notice that here I've kind of brought together the ideas from Blitzball, but also from the tree, and there's a lot of analysis and interpretation here. So I decided this was too long to be in one paragraph, so it's absolutely fine to split it. You'll just know if it's too long where to split it in order for it to still formulate a coherent essay. Okay, so here are the final tips for this particular exam question. Do make sure that you've got clear points. It's always better for you if they're in chronological order, because then you're able to talk about how something, it may not be a character, changes and develops. It may be a relationship, for example. Choose relevant and interesting evidence. Paraphrase. Do not be afraid to paraphrase, but just be careful of storytelling. Use of the keyword in the question or synonyms. Just keep trying to go back to that keyword throughout, just to show the examiner that all of your ideas and points are relevant. Name and analyse techniques wherever you can. It does not have to be language, so you may have less language techniques here than you would have if you were doing the extract question, but that's okay as long as you've still got a range of things you're commenting on. Analyse language if you've remembered the words and phrases. Try and link back to Knowles' intention. Like I said, use his name, throw his name in there, and then it forces you to talk about a decision that he's made and why. Link back to the effect on reader. So what do we think? Why do we think it? What are we supposed to think? How are we supposed to view a character or a relationship or an event? Use context only if it supports or enhances the ideas, if it helps you to explain yourself. And try and use academic phrases. Maybe just try and remember 2 or 3 phrases that you think will help you to develop the way in which you're explaining your ideas. Okay, so thank you very much for taking part in this lesson. I hope that's helped you in terms of understanding how to approach the full novel question and how to write up your answer. Goodbye.